Let me get started by saying that this video is not going to radically change the way you view game development and give you much actionable. That's not going to be the case here. But this is more as someone who makes games and who makes content about games, has seen a bit of an evolution in the past year, 2 years or so, that I just want to talk about a bit more. This is a video that has been like on and off in the works for the past like 2 months, I think, at this point. But I want to talk about what the hell is an indie game at this point, and is there even any value to calling yourself an indie? So let's start by taking a look at what was an indie game. I found this cool website online, and there it says that an indie game, short for independent video game, is a video game created by individuals or smaller development teams without the financial and technical support of a large game publisher. And I think if you ask most people as well, like, hey, what do you see as an indie game? That is generally the approach people go for. It really dives into that indie aspect of independent, not owned by like Sony or Microsoft or another big corporation. And it's more smaller games that are like more unique. They're also often made by solo devs or very small teams. So games like Stardew Valley, Hollow Knight, Shovel Knight, Dwarf Fortress, Hyper Light Drifter. The list goes on and on. There's a lot of like big indie games that were made by very small teams with very limited resources and that have had lasting impacts in the game industry. I think there are pretty much no gamers, even like the most hardcore Call of Duty only gamers at this point, they know about the concept of indie games, where it's usually like the smaller, scrappier games. Apart from that, like, it's independent, there has never been any like hard arbitrary numbers of, oh, you need to have a team that is less than 10 people or less than $1 million in funding or whatever. That is not really a thing. It's more just about that, hey, they're not owned by a massive company. But as someone who is an indie game developer, I think there's no denying that there is something that I've been troubled by over the past year or so, and that is that indie doesn't really mean anything anymore, in my opinion. One of the big moments where you saw this was at the Game Awards, where Dave the Diver, a game made by a studio of 30 people, which has the parent company Nexon, has the CEO stating even that, hey, we are not an indie games company, and still it was one of the original nominations for Indie Game of the Year, where it seems like the only real criteria that the Game Awards had is, oh, it has a pixel art style and it looks pretty cute, this has to be an indie game. And that's like the perception that not just the Game Awards has, but also a lot of other people I talk to. If you tell them like, hey, you know, Dave the Diver is not really an indie game, they're like, oh, I thought it was one because of that art style, because it looks so cute. But the game is actually incredibly deep and has like spent multiple years with a large team in development. But you wouldn't be able to tell that just from looking at like the store page or whatever. Another one that I absolutely hate is that people come to me and they're like, oh yeah, Forge Industry failed, but you just need to do like the devs at Palworld. They're also indies. And it's like, no, my brother, Palworld had $7 million in funding, and the only thing indie about them was that they had no clue what they were doing, and they were like very scrappy. It's like the story of they didn't even have version control. They just had a bucket of USB sticks where they stored on like older builds of their game, but they still had funding. Maybe not from a full-on like publisher, but they were definitely not scrappy with no budgets for anything at all. They did still fit the definition of like a smaller team, but I think purely from the funding perspective, you can't really say they are a true indie, similar to what we're doing here on this YouTube channel and what a lot of other people, especially our audience, is trying to accomplish as well. You probably do not have $7 million lying around. And then of course, we can't forget my favorite, the small indie game of the year, Baldur's Gate 3, is by the old definition 100% an indie game. They have no publisher, they have no external investors. Even like Hasbro, who licensed the D&D IP, didn't give them much in terms of actual funding, and it was purely just, hey, you can use the Dungeons and Dragons IP. But despite that, it's still a AAA level development cycle of multiple years. It's a AAA level size team of 100+ people over like multiple physical offices. And the game is selling at AAA prices of €60 or $60. But because they have no publisher, they are technically an indie game. Although for Baldur's Gate, it seems like people did realize like, hey, this is not an actual indie game anymore. And then something else that has been like developing over the past few years is the concept even of triple indie, where people accept that, hey, not everything is like a scrappy indie game. There's also like other indie games that have like bigger teams already, and that's where the triple indie initiative comes in. So this is games like, for example, Slay the Spire 2, or there was like an entire showcase of other games. Those can already be seen as triple I, which is like, instead of triple A, it's like indie with more production, with more marketing budget and whatnot, bigger studios. So it's gotten really hard to classify what is an indie and what isn't. And how does this affect us? poor lowly indie developers trying to make our first games. And the first issue is that right now, when you go to sites like Gamealytic, you can do like statistic research. Over 80% of all the games released on Steam in like the entire lifetime at this point have the indie tag, which is something like Chris Zukowski talks about in his Steam tagging thing as well. It's like, don't put indie as one of your top things because it's the most popular tag. Put it very low because it's not really going to give Steam tagging a good idea anymore. There are so many games that like technically are indie or like aren't indie that it has basically lost really what the tag means. And also since 2024 started, like 4,000 games or something have been released, which is like a ridiculously high amount of games. And sure, some of them may be like shovelware games. I know you guys like to say that, oh, it's like AI games, they don't even get 10 reviews. There's some of that. But it's also just gotten easier for people to make their own games through channels like these, through engines like Godot and Unity, getting like free licensing. Because of that, more and more people get into the game dev scene, and that's also just more competition, more people that are releasing their game every day. And then you of course have like the 500 different NSFW games that release every single day for some reason, and that will out-earn whatever you made with your game. But that raises the question also that not even looking at like specific genres being saturated, like 2D platformers or whatever, is game development itself saturated at this point? And is it even worth it for new people to get into game development looking to get success or whatever? And I think definitely the answer to that question is still yes, but through videos that we've talked about before as well, the bar that you need to reach for your game to be actually successful has raised a lot in terms of gameplay, in terms of visuals, and in terms of all of that, because you as an indie are now competing with Dave the Diver. Even though it's not technically an indie, that's what gamers still think is an indie. So you need to be able to get on that level as well. Or, you know, you can actually still just make games, but for fun. This is sometimes a wild concept to me, because I am very deep in the sauce of like, hey, running a studio, making games with the goal of making money off them at some point. But like Code Monkey made a very good video recently where he's like, hey, look guys, it's just like another hobby for a lot of people, where people pay for going to the gym, or they pay for like model trains or something, and they don't plan to ever make money from their hobby. Why should game development be like, oh, every game you make, you immediately do you have a massive success? And if that's the case, then also like, this does not matter, this video at all, and like the changing indie landscape, because you just want to get your game out there. So know that, hey, don't fully give up on game dev, but things are changing a little bit, because games like Dave the Diver, like I said, and Palworld, they're still competition to you. Because the regular gamer, which is going to be your audience, they do not care about your feelings and the fact that you poured 7 years of like late nights into your game. If they don't like it, they don't like it, and they'll go back to Palworld, or they'll go back to Manor Lords, or whatever other game that is the new hotness right now, that is like indie in their eyes, and they'll just play that instead. And you are going to have to compete with that. I always say this as well, like, we shouldn't be as shallow as gamers, but if it looks like an indie and you don't even play it, for most people it's already an indie game. If it doesn't have like AAA level graphics, it's obviously an indie game, right? That is the sentiment a lot of gamers have, and that's the sentiment that a lot of your audience for your games will have then as well. So what are my like completely scientific wild ass guesses about how is indie game development going to change over the next few years? And I think there will be a bit of a paradigm shift where like the top 1 or 2% of all the games released on Steam, the ones that have like 100,000 plus wishlists, they take like 95% of the total Steam revenue. I think this is also something that you see more and more with Steam Next Fest actually, where back in the old days, Steam Next Fest was a great way to get visibility for your small indie game, because everyone was treated somewhat equally. But I think especially with the last like 2 Next Fests, this is a sentiment I had as well, is like, if you go into the Next Fest with already like a 50,000 wishlist or something, you're going to double that, triple that, whatever. But if you go in with not that much wishlist, you're just going to lose, and you will not be getting much more. This is not just me being salty about, hey, I didn't get the wishlist I was hoping for Songs of Everjade. This is me also talking to other game developers who got like at most like 1,000 wishlists from Steam Next Fest, despite having games that looked way better, that had like actual good gameplay, good visuals and things like that. So I think definitely there will be the top 1-2% that has good visuals, that has like some good marketing strategy, and they will completely blow you out of the water in terms of how many wishlists they'll get, how much success they'll get, that it's going to be really hard for you to compete with them. And then someone else that's going to be really hard to compete with is people who do this purely for fun, where they are like, you know, actually, I'm not even gonna bother with the marketing stuff. I'm just gonna make a game for free. Like, that's all I wanna do. I just wanna make a game as a hobby, and then put it on Steam and see where it goes from there. And then you have to compete suddenly with games like Helltaker, which is completely free. It's just a guy who was like, I need more office lady demon girls in my life. Let me just make that change in the world and make Helltaker, and I make it for free. And then it's going to be really hard for you as an indie to charge money for a game that maybe not even has the same amount of content as Helltaker or the same graphics or visuals. And there's nothing at that point you can do to like outcompete them on price, because you can't beat free in that regard. So we still want to make money at some point, right? Because we are in that middle. We are not making free games just for fun, and we also don't have high levels of polish and like funding that we can secure. So I think we're going to have to shift to finding like very specific niches where you can't make a game that is like very general anymore, and you really need to find something, a sub-genre niche that there is still a demand for a game, where you can still bring something new to the table and where there isn't that much competition, where you don't have people making games for free in the same niche because you are not going to compete with them. And this is of course where you have the advice of do not make a 2D platform, because people make 2D platformers that are probably going to be better than yours for free already. They're already out. But I think it's also going to be more and more important to just learn good market research. And this is something where I wish I could tell you how to do it, but I have to be honest, we are not good at market research yet either. I have like very basics, and maybe down the line I will be making some videos where I like walk you through the process of things that I've learned. But I think really being able to find those specific niches and really researching how do I bring something new to the table? What does the audience want? That is going to be probably the most important skill that you're gonna need to have if you want to be like that small indie, like not a triple indie, and still survive in the current landscape. Of course, I'm just a guy sitting in my living room wearing a white shirt and talking about game dev. I have no clue about the actual like macroeconomics of Steam and the indie game dev scene, but this is just what I think the industry is going to, and it's what we're going to have to evolve to as well here in our studio. Now let's see, what would I call an indie? What is something that in my opinion is an indie game? And I think the first thing to look at here is it's not really about where the funding comes from anymore. If you have a Kickstarter, you can still be indie. If you have a publisher, you can still be indie. Like, it's gonna be hard in the current landscape, but you can still get publishers. That is not the problem. I think you can have a publisher and be indie. It's more about the mindset you have of, okay, I get money, how do I spend it? Because indies, you know, we get like everything we can out of a single dollar. That is the general mindset, because everything is still very scarce and you really need to make tough decisions of, hey, am I gonna focus on the art or the gameplay? Generally, you can't focus on both of them at the same time because there's just not enough resources, whether that's time or money, for your studio to put into those different aspects of game development. But of course, this is kind of a bit of a hard one to quantify because you have no idea how the finances are of a studio. I think also studio size is still a pretty big indicator. Like, I think 4 to 6 people is what I would call like still very much indie. And then I think if you go over like 6, or you have like a bunch of extra contractors, I don't know what you're then. Are you like double indie, triple indie? I don't know, but I think the main indies for me is like studios up to like 6 people and maybe like 1 extra guy that they hire for like marketing, contracting or whatnot. But I think I would focus more at that. Like money itself, there's no like hard limit. It's just the mindset of how am I spending my money as a studio. So I guess the main takeaway here is, if you can, learn market research. Like I said, I'm not the best person at it yet either, but I think if there was one thing I would focus on right now, it wasn't purely just learning how to program or whatever. It's first learning how to find a good market for your game. Because it doesn't matter how cracked as a programmer as you are, if you're making another 2D platform or if you're making another match 3 game, you're probably not going to sell much. And it's a bit unfortunate that like if you want to go into this commercially, you are going to look at first at where is there money, where is there an audience for my game, before you actually sink in a whole bunch of time and money and resources and learning new skills, only to make a game that at the end of the day, nobody's really interested in. And that sucks, I know that. And market research is hard as well, because what even is it? Can you just click on Steam for like half an hour and be like, there's not that many games in this specific genre, let me go for it? No, probably not. There's more that you need to do, and you can't just look on like Game Analytic of like average earnings per genre. That's also not enough anymore. I don't have the answer for you, unfortunately. If you have the answer, leave them in a comment down below and maybe I'll pin you. But I hope these ramblings that I had still gave you some more thought about the indie scene and the indie industry as a whole. I'm curious, am I like shouting into the void right now and nobody agrees with me? Let me know in the comments down below as well if you find that there's been a bit of a shift with indie development, and what would your definition be for an indie developer? Is it money-based? Is it publisher-based? Is it team size-based? There's so many ways to define it. I'm curious, maybe you have some better ideas than me. Anyways, that's all I need to say. If you like this video and you aren't subscribed yet, please do so. It really helps us out. In exchange, you get these videos twice a week, so you never miss an upload, because honestly, I think the stuff we put out here is really good and really valuable if you are someone who is, in my opinion, an indie developer, if you fit those qualifications. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!